This discussion is going to be the introductory part of the lecture on the endocrine and metabolic system. So we're going to be talking about the various hormones in the body, how they affect the body, and look at various pathologies that they can be affected by. So again, the focus here on this chapter is going to be looking at the various hormones in the body and how they're affected by various pathologies. So hormones are basically complex proteins that get secreted by various glands into the blood, and they produce various actions within all the different organ systems. So sometimes they produce inhibition, sometimes they stimulate other hormones to produce actions, but they have very important functions in the body. And one of the things that many of them look to regulate is the body's overall metabolism. And essentially what metabolism is, it's the biochemical functions and interactions of the organ systems in the body. So it's kind of a combination of all the organs kind of functioning together, and the various, again, hormones hitting their various targets throughout the body. So looking at some of the background on anatomy and physiology, and we're going to go through the various regions of the endocrine system and talk a little bit about the hormones. I'll specifically mention the hormones they secrete. I might get into a little bit of function, but I'll save the bulk of that for later on. So I'll point some things out here, but we'll talk about some others as we go along. So, and refer to the picture on the side of the screen there. It will kind of show you where in relation we're talking to and where these various endocrine glands are. So starting at the beginning, we look at the hypothalamus. So the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that links the nervous system to the endocrine system. So it's responsible for communication with other organs, particularly when we look at the endocrine system, the posterior pituitary and the adrenal medulla. So it's responsible for sending the hormones, antidiuretic hormone and oxytocin, to the posterior pituitary, which then that takes us to the pituitary gland. So the pituitary gland is a very small gland that sits right at the base of the brain. Again, you can see the picture on the side there showing the enlarged version of the pituitary gland and where it's located in relation to the brain. So the pituitary is broken up into the anterior and posterior pituitary. The posterior pituitary, as it gets from the hypothalamus, will secrete ADH and oxytocin. The anterior pituitary gland will secrete growth hormone, which is responsible for protein synthesis, tissue growth, and increase of the use of fats for fuel. It will secrete thyroid stimulating hormone, which stimulates the thyroid gland. So again, remember, some of these hormones will have larger effects in the body. Other hormones are responsible for going and stimulating other endocrine glands. So make sure that you can separate those two things as you're kind of going through the various functions with these hormones. And then adrenocorticotropic hormone, or what's also known as ACTH, is responsible for stimulating the adrenal cortex to secrete glucocorticoids and androgens. So continuing on further, we're still looking at the anterior pituitary gland. Also secretes follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone, both of which are responsible for stimulating the ovaries and the testes to produce the hormones they're responsible for. The thyroid gland, which sits in the anterior portion of the neck, and you can see it down there. The thyroid gland is responsible for secreting hormones, thyroxine and triiodinothyronine, which help in increasing the body's metabolism, or increasing what we call the basal metabolic rate. Another hormone secreted by the thyroid gland is something called calcitonin. Calcitonin is responsible for the decreased demineralization of bones, and that's in relation to regulating blood calcium levels. So when blood calcium levels are adequate, the body doesn't have to pull calcium from the bones. So in order to trigger that response, calcitonin is released. And the flip side to that is, as we go down further, if blood calcium levels do drop, the parathyroid gland is responsible for secreting parathyroid hormone that produces demineralization of bone. So for one reason or another, if blood calcium levels are low and the body needs to increase, the body has to have a certain level of calcium in the blood, the best place to go for it are the bones. Now obviously there's other problems that could potentially be related to that if that's used too much, but the parathyroid hormone is responsible for that. So bone demineralization is kind of a back and forth between those two hormones. So calcitonin decreases the demineralization, parathyroid hormone actually demineralizes the bone. The adrenal glands, which sit on the top of the kidneys, so again you can see that in the picture on the slide. There's two parts to the adrenal glands. You have the adrenal medulla, which secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine, and you have the adrenal cortex, which is going to be responsible for secreting aldosterone, cortisol, and testosterone. Aldosterone is a hormone that increases sodium in the blood. Cortisol is responsible for, in the immune functioning in the stress response, it suppresses the immune system, actually causes an increase in blood glucose, and also has anti-inflammatory effects. And then we know some of the effects of increased testosterone in the blood as well. So, and this is where females have a very small amount of testosterone, and that's basically where females get their testosterone from, is in the adrenal cortex. Moving on, you have the pancreas, which we talked about the pancreas's functions with the digestive system. So we refer to that as the exocrine pancreas. The endocrine pancreas is responsible for secreting glucagon and insulin, which are responsible for regulating blood sugar in the body. Then when you look at, particularly for females and males, you have the ovaries, which are responsible for producing estrogen and progesterone, and the testes in males responsible for producing testosterone. So it's the reason why the males have so much more testosterone in their bodies is due to their testes. So in looking at the application of the function of the hormones within the body, we look at the body's production of energy. The most immediate source of energy coming from the intake of carbohydrates, which gets converted into blood glucose. Now, the hormone interaction responsible for maintaining appropriate levels of blood glucose is an interaction primarily between insulin, glucagon, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and growth hormone. The responsibilities there, insulin is responsible for allowing the blood glucose to be taken into the cells, whereas glucagon, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and growth hormone are responsible for increasing the levels of blood glucose. So opposite actions there. You have insulin, which is responsible for decreasing blood glucose. The other hormones responsible for actually raising the glucose in the blood. Transferring this over to look at what has to happen with exercise. With exercise, there will be decreased secretions of insulin because of the glucose that's needed. In addition to that, with exercise, the insulin receptors do have increased sensitivity, so the body needs blood glucose immediately available, and part of what will inhibit the insulin production will be the increased secretion of epinephrine, norepinephrine, growth hormone, and cortisol while exercise is taking place. So carrying this over into regulation of body temperature, when we're just looking at body temperature at rest, because of all the normal metabolic processes of the body, there's heat dissipation given off. So as all the normal body processes are working, interaction between the organs is occurring at rest, the excess energy gets dissipated at heat, and that's what maintains our body temperature at what we consider the normal of 98.6. Now, our body has a way of regulating its temperature based on environmental conditions, and it's primarily regulated by the release of thyroid stimulating hormone, which is given to the pituitary gland from the hypothalamus. So what thyroid stimulating hormone is going to do is either increase or decrease metabolism based upon the demands that are happening based upon whether someone is exposed to cold or heat. So in the situation where someone is exposed to cold, take for instance, there will be an increase in thyroid stimulating hormone, which will allow the metabolism of the body to increase in order to keep body temperature up. The reverse will happen in the heat. So obviously in the heat, or what would occur with exercise, we don't want the body temperature to rise much above what it would normally be at. So you would decrease thyroid stimulating hormone in that situation. We also have heat dissipating functions, obviously through the sweating mechanism. So as the core temperature will rise, the body will also produce the heat dissipating function of utilizing the sweating mechanism to bring the temperature down. Ideally, with what you would have in a situation where someone obviously is healthy and doesn't have any issues with hormone secretion, is that even though the body temperature will initially rise with exercise, eventually they will reach what's called a steady state. So due to the hormone interaction and also due to the sweating mechanism, it will keep their body temperature within a reasonable range that won't cause problems. So, sort of associated with the regulation of body temperature, we also have body fluid regulation, which we know, again, obviously have being adequately hydrated is important in regards to the sweating mechanism. The antidiuretic hormone is going to have a major role in regulating body fluid regulation. Again, this is another hormone given by the hypothalamus to the pituitary, gets secreted by the pituitary gland. The responsibility of this hormone is to retain water, so it's going to increase the absorption of water in the kidneys and cause decreased urine volume. So in regards to how this hormone gets regulated naturally, exercise is going to increase antidiuretic hormone, which would make sense because when you're exercising, having the increase, being able to retain water is going to be important, obviously for use in the sweating mechanism, and also maintaining hydration will also inhibit the secretion because of the fact that your body will want to be excreting any type of excess. So basically what antidiuretic hormone does is it decreases the amount of urination by increasing the absorption of water in the body.